Moving to this now, opposition parties, including those in government of national unity, are calling for the establishment of an oversight committee for the presidency. During the presidential budget debate, the MK party called for a committee that would monitor the presidency. This after President Ramaphosa decided to keep off the key departments under his office under the government of national unity. The public enterprises is now under the presidency. Joining us is Kevin Mileham, who's the DA MP, as well as Dr. Corné Mulder, who's the FF Plus Member of Parliament. Gentlemen, a pleasure to have you on the program this evening. Mr. Mileham, I'll start with you. Can you elaborate on why you believe a dedicated parliamentary committee for the presidency is essential, particularly in light of the recent shift in oversight responsibilities from the Department of Public Enterprises?
Yes, thank you very much. Let me start by saying that transparency, accountability, and openness are fundamental cornerstones of our democracy, and they're enshrined in our Constitution. In the Zondo Commission, Chief Justice Zondo, former Chief Justice Zondo, he left today and he has done sterling work, but he identified that one of the failures that led to state capture and corruption was that Parliament had not implemented effective oversight over the executive, and that this is a fundamental role of Parliament. In fact, Section 55(2) of the Constitution says that Parliament must have oversight over all executive organs of state and all state-owned entities. So it is necessary for Parliament to see what the President is doing, what the Presidency is doing, and how they're spending their money, and whether they are meeting their targets, and to ensure that the President is actually delivering on his promises.
Dr. Mulder, you've suggested implementing a system similar to the UK model for monitoring the President. Can you provide more details on how this system would function and also its expected impact on governance?
Yeah, sure. I think this is not a new issue. We've been dealing with this omission for many, many years in Parliament. As you are aware that there are portfolio committees that do oversight over all the departments of state except the presidency. Vote 1, the president, there's no oversight in terms of a dedicated commission, and that's a committee, and that's a huge problem. So last year, exactly a year ago, a delegation of six senior members of Parliament did visit the United Kingdom to go and see what they do in terms of oversight over the British Prime Minister. And it was interesting to see from the way that they operate. Now, interesting enough, the portfolio committees in Parliament that deals with oversight of the different departments consists of 11 members. But the oversight committee that is used in the UK that do oversight over the Prime Minister is not an ordinary committee. It's a committee that exists, and they call it the liaison committee. And it consists of the chairpersons of all the different portfolio committees in their system. In other words, you get the chairpersons of all the relevant committees around the table, and then that liaison committee then interacts with the Prime Minister and his office and the Cabinet's office. And it goes beyond only the budget. It also interacts with the Prime Minister in terms of policy, because the Prime Minister is responsible for policy formulation. In our instance, in our Constitution, the Presidency is supposed to be taking responsibility for policy formulation. But it gives an opportunity for the chairpersons of the different portfolios to interact with the executive and the President in this instance to deal with policy as well as oversight over the budget. Now, all I'm saying is, clearly, we need something unique that will fit our budget and will fit what we need in South Africa. But the thing that stands out very clearly, we cannot go on without having some mechanism, unique mechanism in our context that will do oversight over Vote 1, the presidency. And I think there's a huge outcry from within the government of national unity, but also from other opposition parties as well. And we need to move on this rather quickly, I think.
Right. Mr. Mileham, the call for a portfolio committee has been made before. What are the specific gaps or even failures in oversight that have emerged in recent years? And how would a dedicated committee address these issues?
So let's start with the state-owned entities that have been moved under the presidency. Effectively, we need to make sure that the line committees, for example, Portfolio Committee on Energy and Electricity, on which I sit, has oversight over Eskom. We need to make sure that the Transport Portfolio Committee has oversight over Transnet. But in addition to that, we need to make sure that the President's advisors and his activities that are housed in the Presidency, the Department of Performance Monitoring and Evaluation, etc., are properly monitored and evaluated. and that they are called to account. One of the problems that we've had over several years, and in the 6th Parliament, the presiding officer said, well, you get an opportunity to ask questions of the president. We do that once a quarter. We get to ask questions of the president. So we need to be able to interact more frequently. We need to be able to dig more deeply into the issues, to be able, as Parliament, to raise concerns and say, what are you doing about this? How are you spending your money? Why are you spending it on that? Why are you doing this and not that? And really drill down into the activities that are occurring within the presidency. And over the past 30 years, that has been allowed to not happen. So we're now reiterating our call that goes back many years, as Dr. Mulder quite rightly says, for a dedicated oversight committee over the presidency and its activities.
Dr. Mulder, the Phala Phala scandal has been a focal point of discussion about presidential accountability. How do you see a dedicated oversight committee indeed addressing such high-profile issues, if you will?
Let me try to just go back 1 second. You see, one must also understand that in the last couple of years, and it's continuing, the presidency is increasing all the time. It's getting bigger and bigger. At some stage, the presidency occupied the west wing of the union buildings. It's now all of the union building, as well as outside of the union buildings. And more functions are now falling under the presidency. So it's getting bigger and bigger. And the need for oversight is getting stronger all the time. I honestly think that if you do oversight, one should draw a distinction. For example, something like the Phala Phala thing. I'm not so sure if that will fall under the scrutiny of a dedicated portfolio committee dealing with the presidency. Yes, it may be the president himself in his personal capacity, but I believe there are other mechanisms that should deal with those kind of things. There are ethics committees, there are an ad hoc committee, etc., etc. And I think one should be careful not to draw personal scores into the oversight of the office of the presidency in terms of personal things that may happen with any incumbent of the office of president, either in his official capacity or in a personal capacity. But those are the kind of details I think that should be sorted out when the rules subcommittee on the rules go into the details of how we structure this kind of thing. I would not like to see that the whole idea of oversight falls by the wayside because of some colleagues from other parties that may want to settle personal scores. That should not be the focus, I believe.
Mr. Mileham, the state capture inquiry, or the report rather, it did recommend greater oversight. What steps have been taken by Parliament so far in response to this recommendation? And how does your proposal build on that?
Well, let's start with how it builds on that. This is necessary because the presidency has not been effectively overseen. It needs to be more closely monitored, as Dr. Mulder rightly says. It needs to have greater accountability to Parliament. And we've seen over the years that there has been a lack of accountability. Now, the other issue that the Zondo report identifies is that the executive, and here we're talking the ministers and deputy ministers, have not been effectively scrutinized, and they have not been held to account. They've been allowed to get away with answering flippantly or not answering at all. There's been a very soft touch by Parliament on the executive. And we need to recognize that our government consists of 3 separate arms, that there is the judiciary, the legislative, and the executive. And our branch, Parliament, is the legislative, to which the executive is accountable. We need to hold them to account. We need to make sure that they answer, and we need to make sure they answer comprehensively. We also need to make sure that we answer the questions that people are asking, that the issues of the day are not brushed aside, that they're not put away and allowed to dissipate. So if, for example, the VBS scandal, to use one example, if that is something that is pertinent, it needs to go to the relevant portfolio committee, and they need to investigate it and interrogate it. And the presiding officers need to allow those interrogations and those investigations to occur. And that's not just the presiding officers of Parliament, but also the chairpersons of the committee and the ANC. You know, as legislators, we need to take a step back from our party and look at the needs of the country. We need to put the country first in what we do. And if that means holding the executive, no matter what party they come from, to account, we must do so.
Dr. Mulder, speaking to Mr. Mileham's response as well, how do we then ensure the creation of this new oversight body does not lead to, call it bureaucratic duplication or even inefficiency of efforts already being undertaken by existing parliamentary committees?
No, I don't think that will happen because the existing committees focus basically on their specific mandates in terms of the portfolio that they deal with. But you've got the presidency getting stronger and bigger all the time, and there's no real oversight at all. So you need to do that. And I think if one would go down the route of the British kind of model, I don't know if we will do that, where you get different chairpersons involved. I don't know if we will decide on that. But that then deals also with policy, specifically. In other words, the executive decides on certain policy things, but I think it's up to the legislature also to question those policy directives. Why are you going for this policy? Isn't there a better alternative, etc., etc.? You see, I've got one problem, and I sometimes look at the United States as an example. One of our problems is that our executive members are also members of the legislature. They remain members of parliament. They remain members of their parties, etc. And that sometimes makes it difficult for political parties to scrutinize some of their own members who are also part of the legislature. That is not the case in the United States. Members of the secretariat there that are secretaries that are part of the executive are not part of Congress. So they are scrutinized in a much harsher way that we've got. But I think it's up to the new parliament. The seventh parliament will have to set the examples. The presiding officers must set the example and not allow members of the executive to get away with questions that they are not answering. And answering of questions in parliament is just some part of the oversight that we need to do. But the committees themselves are the real engine rooms where these scrutiny will take place. And we cannot continue without having a dedicated committee that deals with vote one of the presidents. And I really think if I listen to what the president said in his reply in parliament at the end of his debate this week, I don't think that there's a reluctance by the president that he doesn't want to go that route. I think he understands that it's absolutely essential, but I think we need to move quickly and create a unique mechanism that can work for our circumstances.
Dr. Mulder, as well as Mr. Mileham, thank you so much for shedding light on this call for a parliamentary committee to oversee the presidency. We've been getting a perspective from their parties as well.